When I first decided to leave the bustling chaos of city life behind, I envisioned serene mornings surrounded by nature, where the only sounds were birds chirping and leaves rustling in the wind. The allure of living off the grid promised a life free from the constraints of modern society, but what awaited me was a descent into darkness I could never have imagined. I packed my belongings into my rusted pickup truck, eager for the journey ahead. The road twisted and turned through sprawling forests, and as I drove deeper into the wilderness, I felt an intoxicating mix of excitement and apprehension. I was leaving behind the noise of the city, the constant buzz of notifications, the pressure of deadlines. I was ready to embrace a simpler, quieter existence in the quaint cabin I had rented near a remote lake. Upon arrival, the cabin stood solitary against the backdrop of towering pine trees, its weathered wood blending seamlessly with the landscape. It exuded a rustic charm, promising solace and a return to nature. The previous tenant had left it stocked with enough supplies to last a few weeks, which was just enough time for me to acclimate. The first few days were blissful. I awoke with the sun, brewed coffee over a crackling fire, and explored the surrounding woods. Each breath filled my lungs with fresh air, and I reveled in the beauty of my surroundings. I took long walks along the lake, marveling at the way the light danced on the water's surface. My phone was often left behind. I had no use for it in such a picturesque paradise. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, an unsettling quiet enveloped the cabin. The sounds of nature transformed from soothing melodies into ominous whispers. The first night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning under the heavy quilt, my ears straining to detect any signs of life outside. The silence pressed down on me, thick and palpable, as if the forest were holding its breath. On the fourth night, I was jolted from sleep by a peculiar noise. It was a low, guttural sound echoing through the woods, sending shivers down my spine. It wasn't an animal, at least not one I could identify. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the window, peering into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the night, revealing only shadows that danced eerily among the trees. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. It was probably just the wind, but as I lay back down, unease curled in my stomach. It felt as though I was being watched, the eyes of the forest scrutinizing my every move. Sleep eluded me, and the oppressive quiet grew louder, invading my thoughts. The following day, I decided to venture into town for supplies. The small village, nestled at the edge of the forest, was quaint yet unsettling. The townsfolk were friendly enough, but there was an air of secrecy about them, as if they shared whispers that never reached outsiders. I noticed the way they looked at me, curiosity mingled with something darker, something I couldn't quite place. After gathering my groceries, I stopped by a local diner, hoping to connect with someone who could provide insights about living in the area. The diner was filled with worn booths and the smell of greasy food, a stark contrast to the fresh air I had grown accustomed to. I struck up a conversation with an elderly man named Frank, who had lived in the area for decades. "Living out there, huh?" he said, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "You're braver than most." "Is it really that bad?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He leaned in, lowering his voice as if the walls themselves had ears. "It's not the wilderness you need to worry about. It's the things that lurk in it. People go missing around here, you know, just vanish. The forest takes them." I chuckled nervously, brushing off his ominous words. "You mean like urban legends? I'm sure it's just stories to scare tourists." He shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "No, it's real. You can't trust the woods. They can mess with your mind. You hear things, see things. Just remember, you're not alone out there." His warning hung in the air, and I felt a chill creeping down my spine. I left the diner, the bell chiming cheerfully as I stepped outside, but the warmth of the sun didn't reach me. I shoved the groceries into the back of my truck and glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Frank's eyes boring into my back. That evening, back at the cabin, I attempted to shake off Frank's words, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I cooked dinner, filling the air with the comforting aroma of roasted vegetables and chicken, but the shadows seemed to stretch longer as night fell. I settled in with a book, trying to distract myself, but the silence was deafening. The following nights were filled with the same unsettling sounds, growing more distinct: a rustle of leaves, a branch snapping, whispers that seemed to rise and fall with the wind. I'd sit up in bed, clutching my flashlight, listening intently. My sleep-deprived mind began to conjure images of what lurked outside my cabin: creatures with glowing eyes, shapes that shifted in the darkness, and shadows that moved against the trees. One evening, I decided to confront my fears. Armed with my flashlight, I stepped outside, the cool air biting against my skin. I walked toward the lake, determined to find the source of the strange sounds that had haunted me. The moon illuminated the water, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. I felt strangely exhilarated, as if the thrill of the unknown was finally drawing me out of my paranoia. As I reached the water's edge, the quiet enveloped me, and for a moment, I felt at peace. I took a deep breath, ready to turn back when a sudden rustling in the bushes caught my attention. My heart raced, and I shined the flashlight in that direction, the beam slicing through the dark. Nothing. I stood there, my breath hitching in my throat. Just as I was about to dismiss it as another figment of my imagination, I caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow darting between the trees, fast and agile. My heart thumped louder, each beat echoing in my ears. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered me. Then, out of nowhere, a figure emerged. It was a man, disheveled and wild-eyed, stumbling toward me as if he had just escaped from a nightmare. He appeared to be in his 30s, clothes torn and muddy, face streaked with dirt. "Help, please," he gasped, collapsing to his knees at the water's edge. My instinct screamed to run, but curiosity and concern rooted me in place. "What happened?" I asked, my voice shaky. He looked up at me, eyes wide with terror. "The woods, they're not safe. They want you. They'll take you," he muttered, his words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "You have to leave, now." Suddenly, a deep growl resonated from the depths of the forest. The sound sent a jolt of fear through me, and I took a step back. The man's expression twisted in fear, and he scrambled to his feet, grabbing my arm. "We have to go, it's coming." Without thinking, I pulled away and ran toward the cabin, adrenaline surging through me. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the weight of the forest pressing down, as if it were alive and watching. I burst through the door and locked it behind me, my heart racing. As I sank to the floor, panting, I replayed the man's words in my head. "They want you. They'll take you." What had I gotten myself into? That night, I kept the lights on, staring out into the blackness, too terrified to sleep. The man's terrified face haunted me. Who was he? What did he mean by they? I replayed the events in my mind, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe he was just another lost soul, or maybe he was part of the very danger Frank had warned me about. As dawn broke, the sun painted the sky in soft pastels, and the forest began to stir. The tranquility of the morning felt like a lie, a facade that masked the horrors of the night before. I resolved to leave the cabin and the forest behind, but something deep inside me held me back, urging me to uncover the truth of this haunting place. I needed answers. As the sun climbed higher, I felt a glimmer of determination break through my fear. I couldn't leave without knowing what lurked in those woods. With a mix of dread and resolve, I decided to explore further, hoping to find the man from last night, or any clues about what had happened to him. I donned my hiking boots, packed a small backpack with water, and grabbed my trusty flashlight. The chill of the morning air wrapped around me as I stepped outside. The cabin stood quiet, almost eerie in its stillness. I took a deep breath and headed toward the path that led deeper into the woods, where the man had fled. As I walked, the sunlight filtered through the branches, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor, but the beauty was deceptive. I could still hear the echoes of the man's words in my head. "The woods want you." With every step I felt the weight of the trees surrounding me, their gnarled roots like fingers grasping at the earth. I followed the path, careful to stay alert for any signs of movement or sound. After about half an hour, I came to a clearing with a small creek running through it. The water bubbled cheerfully, but the tranquility was short-lived. Just beyond the creek, I spotted something unusual, a tattered piece of fabric caught on a branch. Curiosity piqued, I approached and discovered it was part of a jacket, similar to what the man had been wearing. My heart raced as I examined the area for more clues. The ground was littered with broken branches and leaves, and the earth was disturbed, as if someone had been dragged through the underbrush. Just as I was piecing together what might have happened, a rustling in the bushes behind me made my heart stop. I spun around, flashlight aimed at the noise, but it was only a deer bounding away at the sight of me. I exhaled, trying to calm my racing heart. This was just a simple hike, I reminded myself. I was overreacting. But as I scanned the surroundings, an unsettling sensation crawled up my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I decided to push further into the woods, hoping to find any signs of the man or further evidence of his frantic escape. I stumbled across old, twisted trees and dense underbrush, every snap of a twig sounding like a gunshot in the silence. The deeper I went, the more I felt the woods closing in around me. I tried to dismiss the creeping fear, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Yet, every now and then, I'd hear a distant sound, an echo of footsteps, or a faint whisper that made my skin crawl. Suddenly, I reached a spot where the trees thinned out, revealing a small, dilapidated cabin. It was much older than mine, its windows boarded up, and vines clawed their way up the sides. It looked abandoned, but a sense of dread washed over me. What had happened here? Was this where the man had come from? Compelled by an unknown force, I approached the cabin, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight as I stepped onto the porch. The door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but curiosity propelled me forward. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dark, the air thick with dust and decay, cobwebs draped from the ceiling, and remnants of furniture lay strewn about, covered in a layer of grime. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness and revealing old photographs hanging on the walls, faded faces staring back at me, their expressions eerily solemn. One photograph caught my attention, a family portrait from decades ago. There was a woman holding a child, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. In the background, I noticed a figure lurking among the trees, half shrouded in shadow. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the same sense of being watched that had plagued me since my arrival. As I explored the cabin, I found remnants of everyday life, old dishes, a rusted knife, and a broken mirror. But there was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. In the corner, I stumbled upon a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. I carefully opened it, my heart pounding as I read the entries, written in a frantic scrawl. They come at night. They whisper my name. I can't escape them. They know my fears. They want me to join them. A chill raced through me. The entries continued, detailing the writer's descent into madness, speaking of the woods as if they were alive, sentient, preying on the vulnerable. I flipped through more pages, each entry more disturbing than the last, culminating in a final entry that sent a wave of terror coursing through me. I have to leave this place. I can hear them outside. They're coming for me. I won't let them take me. I slammed the journal shut, feeling bile rise in my throat. This was madness, but as I glanced toward the door, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I was not alone. I could sense it. The very air in the cabin shifted, a cold draft sweeping through as if something had entered with me. I stumbled backward, heart racing, but before I could make a move, a low growl echoed from outside. Panic surged through me as I darted for the door, but it slammed shut as I reached for the handle, as if held shut by an unseen force. I pulled desperately at the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out," I screamed, fear and adrenaline coursing through me. The growling intensified, the sound reverberating around me. Shadows began to swirl, coalescing into indistinct shapes that seemed to reach for me. I pounded on the door, my voice hoarse as I yelled for help, but there was only silence, an all-consuming silence that pressed in on me. With a surge of desperation, I turned back to the cabin's interior, scanning for another way out. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I felt something brush against my shoulder. I whirled around, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness and the sense of dread that hung in the air. Finally, I spotted a small window at the back of the cabin. With renewed determination, I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. I shoved my flashlight into my backpack, knowing I wouldn't have time to look for it later. As I reached the window, I yanked it open, the sound of the hinges screeching echoing in the stillness. I squeezed through, cutting my arms on the jagged edges of the frame as I tumbled out into the underbrush. The forest enveloped me in its cold embrace, but I didn't stop to assess my injuries. I bolted, weaving between the trees, the growling echoing behind me, a primal sound that urged me to run faster. Branches whipped against my face, and I stumbled more than once, but the fear driving me forward drowned out the pain. I could feel the forest closing in around me, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a reminder of the terror I had just escaped. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I reached the familiar trail that led back to my cabin. Bursting through the door, I locked it behind me and sank to the floor, gasping for breath. My heart thundered in my chest, and my hands trembled as I fought to comprehend the madness of the woods. I had to leave. I had to escape this nightmare. But as I sat there in the dim light of the cabin, my mind racing, I heard something that sent chills down my spine. A faint whisper, barely audible but unmistakable, threading its way through the silence. It was calling my name, a haunting melody that promised both allure and danger. The whispers crept through the cabin, weaving into my consciousness like a dark melody. They seemed to echo from the very walls, a siren song that lured me in, tugging at the frayed edges of my sanity. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it was no use. The sound penetrated my thoughts, wrapping around my mind, refusing to let go. "Leave me alone," I shouted into the emptiness, but the whispers only grew louder, more insistent. It felt as if the cabin itself was alive, pulsing with energy, drawing me in with every breath I took. Panic surged within me as I scanned the room for anything that could distract me from the cacophony. The journal I had found lay abandoned on the floor, its pages flicking open as if beckoning me back. I fought the urge to look at it again, knowing it would only deepen my despair. In a moment of desperation, I grabbed my backpack and stumbled out of the cabin, driven by a primal instinct to escape. I took off down the trail, forcing myself to focus on the path ahead. Each step was heavy, my limbs feeling as if they were dragging through molasses, but I couldn't stop. The whispers were relentless, an invisible force pushing me forward. I made my way toward the creek, hoping that the sound of rushing water would drown out the sinister melody that echoed in my mind. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist, creating a landscape that was both beautiful and terrifying. As I approached the creek, the whispers faded slightly, replaced by the soothing sound of water flowing over rocks. I knelt beside the creek, splashing cold water on my face in an attempt to shake off the effects of my fear. It helped momentarily, grounding me in the present, but I knew I couldn't stay here long. I glanced upstream, contemplating whether to follow the creek further or head back to my cabin, but the woods were closing in around me, a thick blanket of trees and shadows that felt suffocating. There was no way I could remain here. I had to leave. I had to find help, or at least someone who could make sense of the madness. Just then, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. My heart raced as I turned, flashlight gripped tightly in my hand. Out from the underbrush stepped a figure, and I felt my stomach drop. It was the man from the night before, his eyes wide with terror and panic. He stumbled toward me, disheveled and wild, the very embodiment of fear. "Please, you have to listen," he gasped, his voice frantic. "They're coming for us. You have to get out of here." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to steady my breathing. "Who is coming for us?" He looked around nervously, his eyes darting to the trees. "The woods. They're alive. They're not what you think they are. They want to keep us here forever." I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. "What are you talking about? Why are you here?" "I escaped," he whispered, leaning closer, his breath coming in short gasps. "I thought I could hide, but they always find you. You have to leave before it's too late. They feed off fear, yours and mine." His words sent chills down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see shadows moving in the trees. "What do you mean they feed off fear?" "They're like shadows, but worse. They can make you see things, hear things. They'll play with your mind until you can't tell what's real anymore. You'll go mad. I've seen it happen." I could see the desperation in his eyes, the weight of madness pressing down on him. My instinct was to run, to flee this nightmare that had become my life, but I felt a strange kinship with this man. We were both trapped in the same horror, and I couldn't leave him to face it alone. "Come with me," I said, surprising myself with the offer. "We need to get out of this forest. We can find help together." He shook his head violently, fear etched into his features. "No, they'll follow you. You don't understand. It's better to hide, better to stay quiet. If they sense your fear, they'll come for you." I glanced back at the darkening woods, the trees closing in like a cage. "But if we don't leave, we'll be trapped here forever. We can't let them win." He hesitated, then nodded, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Okay, but we have to be careful. Stay quiet. Don't draw their attention." We began to move cautiously, weaving through the underbrush, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sent my heart racing, but the urgency of escape propelled us forward. As we navigated deeper into the forest, I could feel the tension in the air, a thick layer of dread that hung over us like a shroud. The whispers returned, creeping into my mind, urging me to turn back, to surrender to the forest's call. I fought against them, determined to resist the madness that threatened to overtake me. Minutes stretched into an eternity as we made our way through the woods, every shadow seeming to shift and dance, every sound amplifying our fears. But just when I thought we might make it, a bone-chilling howl echoed through the trees, followed by the growls I had heard before. My heart dropped. What was that? I gasped, glancing at the man beside me. His face had gone pale, and I could see the terror etched into every line of his features. "They've found us," he whispered, and I could see the wildness return to his eyes. We picked up the pace, the fear propelling us forward as we darted through the trees, trying to escape the sounds that pursued us. I felt the shadows stretch and shift, the forest seeming to close in around us, but we kept moving, driven by sheer adrenaline. But then I tripped over a root, tumbling to the ground. I hit the dirt hard, pain shooting through my leg. I glanced back, panic rising as I saw the man hesitate, torn between helping me and fleeing. "Go," I screamed, pushing myself up. "I can't leave you." But he was already backing away, fear overtaking reason. I can't let them take me." And with that, he turned and bolted, disappearing into the trees. "Wait," I shouted, but it was too late. He was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging, and pushed myself to run again. But the howl echoed through the woods once more, closer now, and I felt the primal fear that gripped me tighten. The shadows morphed around me, growing darker and more menacing as I stumbled through the trees. I could feel the forest's pulse, a heartbeat that thrummed beneath my feet. I had to escape. I had to survive. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting between the trees. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to look. There, just beyond my flashlight's reach, stood a figure, its features obscured by darkness. "Help," I cried, stumbling toward the shadow. But as I drew closer, it vanished into thin air, leaving only the echo of its presence behind. Fear coursed through me, and I stumbled backward, heart racing. I turned to run, but a cold wind whipped through the trees, howling like a banshee. I could hear whispers rising, voices overlapping, their words unintelligible, yet filled with menace. "Stop," a voice cried out, piercing through the chaos. I froze, turning to see a woman standing before me, her eyes wide with terror. "You have to be quiet. They'll hear you." I nodded, breathless, desperate to understand. "Who are you? What's going on?" She shook her head, her hair wild and unkempt. "You don't belong here. They'll take you. You have to hide." Before I could respond, the growl returned, a deep and resonant sound that sent shivers down my spine. The woman's face paled, and she glanced back at the trees as if they were alive, shifting and closing in. "Run," she screamed, and before I could process her command, she vanished into the underbrush, leaving me alone once more. The growl echoed again, reverberating in my bones. I couldn't stay here. I turned and sprinted away, my lungs burning, heart racing as I pushed myself through the thick underbrush. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches clawing at my skin, but I couldn't stop. Every breath felt heavy as I ran, desperation fueling my flight. I had to escape this nightmare, to find my way back to civilization before the woods consumed me entirely. But as I fled, I could feel it, the presence following me, watching me, waiting for the moment to strike. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around my mind, drowning out my thoughts, urging me to give in, to accept my fate. But I fought against it, forcing my legs to move, my heart pounding as I sought the path back to my cabin. Just when I thought I could see the light of the cabin through the trees, the ground beneath me gave way, and I stumbled, falling into a deep ravine. I landed hard, pain shooting through my body as I gasped for breath. As I lay there, the shadows gathered around me, the whispers rising to a crescendo. I was trapped, surrounded by darkness and fear, and I could feel the forest closing in. The cold ground beneath me felt like ice, sending a shiver through my bones as I lay in the ravine. My body throbbed with pain from the fall, and I fought to catch my breath, gasping as the shadows swirled around me. The whispers returned, wrapping around my mind like a serpent, squeezing tighter with every passing moment. I pushed myself up, wincing at the sharp pang in my leg. The ravine was steep and treacherous, but the sounds of the forest grew louder above me, the low growls mingling with the whispers that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. I was losing precious time. With a grimace, I struggled to my feet, swaying slightly as I regained my balance. The darkness of the woods pressed in around me, and the shadows twisted in the corners of my vision. I needed to get out, to find a way back to the surface, away from whatever horrors awaited me below. I stumbled up the incline, branches scraping against my skin, my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs felt amplified, the forest alive with unseen eyes watching my every move. I reached the top of the ravine, pulling myself over the edge with a desperate lunge. As I regained my footing, I paused to catch my breath, glancing back into the depths I had just escaped. The darkness within seemed to pulse, a living entity waiting for the next soul to ensnare, but I had no time to dwell on it. I needed to move. I turned to continue my trek through the woods, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the trees behind me. My blood ran cold, and I instinctively ducked behind a large tree, pressing myself against its rough bark as I tried to steady my breath. The footsteps grew closer, and I could hear the whispers again, clearer now, almost forming words. They were beckoning, coaxing me to reveal myself. "Come join us," they seemed to say. "You're one of us now." "No," I hissed, shaking my head. "I won't let you take me." But the fear that gripped me was palpable, thick as fog in the air. I fought to push it down, to quell the rising tide of panic. I couldn't succumb, not now. As the footsteps came to a halt, I peered around the tree, straining to see the figure that had been tracking me. A shape emerged from the shadows, and I felt my heart drop. It was the man, the one who had warned me earlier, but something was off. His eyes were wide and wild, a vacant look that sent chills down my spine. "Help me," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "They're coming." But there was something in his tone that struck me as wrong. It was too desperate, too frayed. I hesitated, fear clenching my gut. "What happened? I thought you were gone." "They're right behind me," he gasped, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Suddenly, I felt a wave of dread wash over me, a gnawing realization. This man wasn't just afraid, he was lost, trapped in the same madness that had consumed the others. I couldn't let myself be drawn in, not again. "Run," I urged, taking a step back. "Get away from me." But he lunged forward, grasping my arm with a grip that felt like iron. "No, we can't separate. They'll get you if you go alone." "Let me go," I shouted, trying to wrench my arm free, but he only tightened his grip. I could feel the shadows shifting around us, the whispers rising to a fever pitch, urging him to pull me into their depths. "I can help you," he insisted, but I could see the wildness in his eyes, the madness lurking just beneath the surface. "We can survive together." My heart raced as I wrestled against his grasp, fear clawing at me. I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust anyone anymore. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from his grip and turned to run, sprinting deeper into the forest. But the darkness chased me, the growls echoing closer as I darted through the trees, branches snapping underfoot. I could feel the forest shifting around me, the shadows morphing into something alive, something hungry. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until I could barely hear the growls over the pounding of my heart. Just as I thought I had gained some distance, I tripped over a root, crashing to the ground once more. As I lay there, the shadows gathered, swirling around me like a living fog. I pressed my hands to the ground, the cool earth grounding me for a brief moment. I had to get up. I had to keep moving. But the whispers returned, more insistent now, wrapping around my mind, pulling me down into their depths. I could feel my resolve faltering, the weight of exhaustion pressing down like a lead blanket. "Join us," they cooed, a siren song that seeped into my bones. "You belong here. You'll never be alone again." "No," I screamed, forcing myself to my feet once more, but the shadows tightened around me, their tendrils reaching for my mind. I stumbled forward, desperately seeking a way out, but every direction felt the same, a labyrinth of darkness closing in. I had to escape. I had to find a way to break free from this nightmare. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed myself to run, fueled by the flickering hope that somewhere beyond the darkness, there was a way out. As I sprinted through the woods, I caught a glimpse of light in the distance, a flickering glow that promised salvation. With renewed determination, I barreled toward it, the whispers behind me fading into the background. But just as I thought I could reach it, a figure stepped into my path, blocking my way. I skidded to a halt, heart racing. It was the woman from before, her eyes wide with fear. "You can't go that way. They'll catch you." "Who?" I gasped, desperation clawing at my throat. "What do you mean?" "The woods. They'll take you if you get too close. You have to hide. They know you're here." I shook my head, frustration boiling over. "I can't hide. I need to escape." But before I could push past her, the growl echoed once more, louder and more menacing. I felt the air shift, the darkness gathering around us. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking. "We have to go." In that moment, I felt it, a cold wave of fear washing over me, the realization that I was out of time. The shadows pressed in, their whispers rising to a crescendo, filling my head with chaos. Without thinking, I grabbed the woman's arm, pulling her along with me as I darted back into the trees. Together, we ran, hearts pounding, driven by the primal urge to escape the forest's grip. But the whispers persisted, a haunting melody that threatened to overwhelm us. "You can't escape," they taunted, their voices intertwining in a chorus of madness. "You belong to us now." But I wouldn't give in. I pushed forward, propelled by the flickering hope that we could find a way out together. The path twisted and turned, the trees shifting around us as we ran. Just as I thought we might break free, the ground beneath us shifted, and I stumbled once more, falling to my knees. The woman gasped, reaching for me, but it was too late. The shadows closed in, enveloping me in darkness. I could feel their presence swirling around me, their whispers penetrating my thoughts. "Join us," they urged, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. "You're one of us now." But even in that moment, I fought against it, fueled by the memory of the man's desperate plea and the knowledge that I could not succumb to this madness. With every ounce of willpower, I pulled myself up and turned to the woman. "We have to keep moving." Together, we pushed forward, the flickering light in the distance growing brighter with each step. The forest trembled around us, the shadows clawing at our heels, but I refused to look back. Finally, we burst through the tree line and into a clearing. The light illuminated a path leading away from the woods, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. I could hardly believe my eyes. "Run," I shouted, urging the woman forward as I sprinted toward the light. But as I reached the edge of the clearing, the shadows surged forward, coalescing into a wall of darkness that threatened to engulf me. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of voices that echoed in my mind. "Stay with us," they urged, their voices laced with temptation. "You don't have to go. You can be free here." I felt my resolve wavering, the pull of the darkness intoxicating. But as I glanced back at the woman, her face illuminated by the light, I knew I had to fight. I couldn't let them take me. With one final push, I sprinted toward the light, the darkness clawing at my heels. I could feel it reaching for me, the shadows brushing against my skin, but I refused to give in. As I crossed the threshold of light, the darkness shattered like glass, retreating into the woods with a furious howl. The whispers fell silent, and the oppressive weight lifted, leaving only the sound of my racing heart. I turned to look back, breathless, and saw the shadows receding into the trees, their haunting presence fading away. The woman stood beside me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We did it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We're free." But even as I embraced the light, I felt a lingering sense of unease. The forest loomed behind us, a dark specter that would forever remain etched in my mind. I knew we had escaped, but the woods would always be a part of me, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of reality. And as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods were watching, waiting for the next moment of weakness to draw me back into their embrace.